तव कथामृतं तप्तजीवनं कविभिरीडितं कल्मषापहम् श्रवणामङ्गलम् श्रीमदानन्दं भुवि क्रीडन्ति भूरिदा जनाः भुवि क्रीडन्ति भूरिदा जनाः। राम कृष्ण जय राम कृष्ण जय परम गुरु जय जय भगवान। राम कृष्ण जय राम कृष्ण जय परम गुरु जय जय भगवान। शारदा मां जय शारदा मां जय परमा माता जय जय मां। शारदा मां जय शारदा मां जय परमा माता जय जय मां। स्वामी जी जय शिव स्वामी जी जय शिव विवेकानंद जय शिव जय स्वामी जी जय शिव स्वामी जी जय शिव विवेकानंद जय शिव जय। राम कृष्ण जय राम कृष्ण जय परम गुरु जय जय भगवान। शारदा मां जय शारदा मां जय परमा माता जय जय मां। स्वामी जी जय शिव स्वामी जी जय शिव विवेकानंद जय शिव जय। राम कृष्ण जय राम कृष्ण जय परम गुरु जय जय भगवान। राम कृष्ण जय राम कृष्ण जय परम गुरु जय जय भगवान।
Pranams to Swami Medhananda. Thanks for coming over here this morning. Our today's program, we will start with the discourse by Swami Medhananda on Vedanta in the age of social media, followed by interactive Q&A. It will start right now after the introduction. Between 12:30 to 2 p.m., we will have lunch downstairs, and 2:30 p.m. we will adjourn. And about Swami Medhananda. Swami Medhananda has been here before. Many of you would have seen last year. And we are very fortunate enough to have Swami this morning. As he is traveling around this area, I think he spent some time hard work in other places. Swami Medhananda is a monk of Ramakrishna order, currently serving as a senior research fellow in philosophy at the Vedanta Society of Southern California in Hollywood. His current research focuses on global philosophy of religion and especially the Vedantic philosophies of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo, among many others. Swami received his spiritual initiation from Swami Spahananda and joined the Ramakrishna order in 2010, and he received his sannyasa in 2020. During these 10 plus years, Swami served as associate professor and the head of program in philosophy at the Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Educational and Research Institute in Bellumat. Swami is the author of 3 books in religion, Vedantic and Philosophies, published by Oxford University and Bloomsbury Presses. And he is the editor of several international journals and published over 30 articles in these fields. Swami is currently working on 3 more books with the Oxford and Cambridge University Presses. He has been invited to lecture at most prestigious universities in the world, including Harvard, Princeton, Oxford, University of Edinburgh, and the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, and many others. And we can keep on giving, that he is talking about Swami for a long time, but we want to give time for Swami to start the discourse. And Swami, you can visit the website swamimedhananda.com and get to know more about Swami, his research and teachings in detail. And with this brief introduction on behalf of the VCC, I welcome Swami to start his discourse. Thank you. Welcome, Swami.
Okay.
How close should the mic be? Be very close? No, I mean, we're recording it, right, for YouTube?
Yes,
Is that,
yes, it's a YouTube live
so
stream.
we should probably bring it closer.
Yes.
But we should extend this, right?
Yeah.
And then we should lock it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can adjust, we can
Yeah.
extend.
Okay.
Let me know your convenience.
I think this is fine, right? This is
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
Okay.
Can see, you know, I can-
Yeah, you can lock it. Right? Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay. Yeah. I think this is good. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the transient to the eternal. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Everyone, thank you for coming. It's wonderful to be here in Connecticut again. I was here a little less than a year ago, I think. And this is part of an East Coast tour. I gave a talk at Harvard on Monday in the Harvard Divinity School, which went really well. It was fun. And I gave a 2-day retreat at Ridgely Manor, and she's attended. It was really fun, actually. It was my first. It was not the first time at Ridgely, but it's the first time doing a retreat there. It's a really beautiful spiritual atmosphere in Ridgely Manor. So if any of you haven't visited yet, I strongly recommend that you visit Ridgely Manor. It's really spiritually charged because Swami Vivekananda himself stayed there for months at a stretch, actually. So it's a very holy place of pilgrimage for people in our tradition. I think we're living in very unique times. In fact, I would argue that we're living in an unprecedented age. And if you were to ask me how would I characterize this unique age, what makes it so unique? I would say we're living in an age of instant gratification. There are many things that are unique about this age, but I think this is what's most unique and unprecedented about it. We're living in an age of instant gratification. We can get whatever we want, more or less, whenever we want, in whatever quantity we want, in a way that just wasn't the case 20 years ago, let alone 100 years ago or 200 years ago. With the advent of the internet, especially the internet, and also social media and just the advance of technology, so just many different factors, AI and many other things. It has ushered in this new age of instant gratification. All of you, I think I don't need to convince you because it's kind of obvious, but I'll just mention a few things. You know, I grew up in the 80s and early 90s. And to watch your favorite TV show, you'd have to wait 1 week for the new episode. Now what do you have? Binge watching. They even use the word binging, right? It's a term used for stuffing yourself beyond excess. You can watch an entire season of your favorite show on Netflix in 1 day. Gorge yourself, literally. If you want to find a romantic partner, in the past you'd have to go to some kind of, a place, a singles night. Now what? Tinder, swipe left, swipe right. Or 100 million dating sites. It's literally, really in every music. When we were in the 80s, we would have cassette tapes. Some of the older people might know what cassette tapes are. Younger people might not even know what are cassette tapes. So to put together what are called mixtapes, you compile your favorite songs. You'd have to wait for that song to play on the radio, then you'd record it, or you'd somehow get it from other tapes. It would take hours. It was fun. It was part of the fun. And now you can, make unlimited playlists with Spotify and YouTube and this and that. In the past, when you're having a debate about, when was so-and-so born, or this historical fact or that, and there'd be debates, endless debates. Now you just ask Siri and you can figure it out right. Like within 1 second, you can ask your watch and you get the answer, or your phone. You can any information you want, and it's a double-edged sword. Right? On the one hand, I'm an academic philosopher, so it's incredibly valuable actually to have that kind of information at your fingertips for research purposes. It's incredibly useful. And it's just a lot easier to do research now. In fact, as he mentioned in the introduction, the generous introduction, I spent 13 years in India, and I was at a tiny university, a brand new university called Vivekananda University in Belumad. No access to world-class libraries. How did I write the books that I wrote? By using online resources, getting articles online, getting books online. So these are the wonderful side. That's the wonderful side of this current age. But there's also a dark side to it. So I want to talk about both those things. But coming back to this main topic, we're living in an unprecedented age of instant gratification. We get whatever we want, whenever we want, in whatever quantity we want. And you might think, well, great, it's a great thing. I just said how useful it is for myself as an academic, and I'm sure many of you also benefit from it on a daily basis. The dark side is there's a certain paradox involved. You would think that the very fact that we're able to get whatever we want, whenever we want, whatever quantity we want, should make us much happier. I wasn't able to get what I wanted in the past as easily. Now I'm getting it. Therefore, I should be that much happier. But that's just not the case. Study after study is finding that we're unhappier than ever. That's the paradox. It's what I would call the paradox of instant gratification. Everybody thinks that if I get what I want in as much quantity as I want, I should be happy and much happier than I am now, since I don't have what I want. And yet the opposite is the case. Why? That's what I want to explore today. And the role specifically that social media plays in this paradox, and it plays a major role in a lot of the unhappiness that we're finding, especially among the youth, among the younger generation. To give you an example, there was a Mental Health America study published last year called The State of Mental Health in America. Some of the key findings. Over 1/5 of Americans suffer from some form of mental illness. That's a huge proportion. Over 50 million Americans. Millions of adults experience thoughts of suicide. And over 1 in 10 youth in the US are experiencing depression that is severely impairing their ability to function at school or work, at home, with family, or in their social life. And there are a number of studies just on social media use, and what they're finding is that people who tend to use social media more heavily tend to suffer far more from different kinds of mental health issues like anxiety and depression. So, I want to explore a few questions with all of you, and we'll have an extended Q&A after the talk, so I look forward to hearing from you as well. Why exactly does heavy social media use lead to depression and unhappiness? And the answer is going to come from, on the one hand, positive psychology and neuroscience in the West, and Vedanta on the Indian side. And I kind of want to bring the insights of East and West together. On a more positive note, how do we use social media more mindfully and more beneficially for ourselves and for society? And more fundamentally, the million-dollar question. Well, if instant gratification is not a recipe for true happiness, what is? How do we achieve happiness in life? Genuine happiness. What positive psychologists call authentic happiness. Happiness may not even be the right word. You might prefer a different term. Fulfillment, joy, contentment. You get the idea. Let's start though first with the benefits of social media because I'll be spending a lot of the talk on the dark side. But it's important to recognize all the benefits. First of all, as all of you know who use social media, I'm sure all of you do to some extent, it helps connect us with people throughout the world. WhatsApp, it's arguable whether WhatsApp counts as social media. I think it maybe is. It does. So then, in that sense, I am using social media because I use WhatsApp because I was in India for so long. So to keep in touch with my monastic friends in India, it's very useful to have WhatsApp. You can make free international phone calls, as you know. You can also keep in touch with your relatives back there, and you can send pictures and media, which is also helpful. Even in India, at least, doctors will use WhatsApp to send your prescriptions and other things. So it's become almost arguably a necessity, at least in India. Here, less so, I would say, in the US. So for networking purposes as well, it's extremely useful. I have an academia.edu website where I post my articles and I meet scholars that way. Again, because I was in India for so long, you don't meet many international scholars, but you can meet them online. They read my articles and they reach out to me through a kind of social media, and then you make connections, you make colleagues. And of course, every one of these, I don't know if Connecticut has a center. The Connecticut Center has a social media account. Do we? We have YouTube. Yeah, well, YouTube is social media. That's true. What about like Instagram or Twitter? You guys have a presence on? Yeah. Anyway, but many of our centers do, because that's a great way to reach out to as broad a population as possible, right? Because a lot of people use it. Sorry? You have WhatsApp as well, right. Okay. Eventually you need to get on Twitter and Instagram, these other things, to get the kids to come out. Yeah. Okay, but so now, why exactly is it that if social media is so helpful, so beneficial, why is it that it's making people so unhappy? Especially, not everybody, and some people they're naturally kind of self-regulated, and so they don't overuse it. But people who tend to use it very heavily, they tend to be less happy and suffer from different mental health issues. Why? I think a really useful place to start is a great insight from Candace Kelsey. She wrote a book published in 2007 called Generation MySpace. And there aren't many young people here, or very young people here, but they might say MySpace. I don't even know what MySpace is. It's kind of almost defunct. It's no longer. It was the social media hub about 2 decades ago. And such is the nature of the internet that you can, shoot up and have an astronomical, what do you call it? IPO, right? Like a public offering, and then come crashing down. So that was the fate of MySpace, like AOL, America Online, if any of you remember that. I'm revealing my age indirectly. I used to have an AOL account. But in any case, her insight applies just as much to contemporary social media as it does to the most popular social media of her day, MySpace. It applies as much to Twitter and Instagram and all these things, Snapchat. She says that the main reason why social media is making people unhappy is because it indirectly indoctrinates its users into accepting 3 fundamental values, each of which is a recipe for unhappiness. First value it teaches. Not necessarily explicitly. Do you see what I'm saying? Indoctrination is not typically explicit, but it's subtle. It's a kind of subtle, implicit brainwashing that's happening. First value. These are her terms, and I might nuance some of them in the course of the talk. 1, I must be entertained all the time. I must be entertained all the time. Second, it's very American. It's an American idiom. If you've got it, flaunt it. If you've got it, flaunt it. 3, success means being a consumer. So capitalist culture. So let's go through, I think it's a useful way to kind of structure the talk. So let's go through these values and analyze them in a little bit more detail. First, I must be entertained all the time. I think actually from a Vedantic standpoint, we can make the statement, the value, more general. It's not just about entertainment. It's about something more fundamental. I must be gratified all the time. I must be gratified all the time. Gratification. Whatever I'm doing must give me instantaneous pleasure. This is one of the fundamental values that social media is kind of surreptitiously indoctrinating us into. What do I mean by that? And why is social media so relevant here? First of all, because social media thrives on tiny little bits of information, tiny little video clips, little pictures, tiny bits of text. That's why Twitter has, or at least it used to have, a word limit. I don't know if it still does, a character limit. The idea is it's catering to people with increasingly short attention spans, right? And it's a kind of vicious cycle where the more people indulge in these kinds of activities, the shorter their attention span becomes, the less they're able to concentrate and focus, right? Second, some of the greatest minds in the world are working to produce the most sophisticated and effective algorithms fueling these different social media websites. So the moment I click on one video or one text or whatever, tweet, that algorithm is going to kick in and it's going to generate 100 more similar kinds of videos, tweets, or whatever. And we get sucked into this kind of echo chamber where we just get more and more of what we want until we get completely glutted. Binge use of social media in a sense. But they encourage it, they reward it, they want you to do it. Right? It's leading to polarization in politics, for instance, unfortunately. So people leaning to the right become even more extreme in the right direction. People leaning to the left become extreme on the super woke side of things. And there's very little nuance. Nuance gets thrown out the window. You know, the idea of centrism, of trying to see both sides, social media, internet, has almost completely eliminated that as a possibility, unfortunately. And if you try to be that person who tries to see both sides, you're going to be vilified, you might be canceled, unfortunately. And it's happening. People are being deplatformed, canceled left and right. You're hearing it in some of the major Ivy League universities and other places. The social dilemma, I don't know how many of you have seen this. It's a documentary about social media. It was released in 2020. It's really a cautionary tale about, especially focusing on how pernicious these algorithms are, fueling these different social media sites. And Tristan Harris, who's a former Google employee, he made a really profound point. He said, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Because when we use social media, I'm not paying for WhatsApp or for YouTube or for this or that, Twitter. It's all free, and yet it's not free. We don't realize what cost, the hidden costs involved. We are the commodity, we are the product that's being analyzed. So there's a massive industry of data analytics where we're data points, and they're learning about and they're selling our behavioral patterns to massive companies who use that data to get us hooked on different things, to make us further addicted to this or that website, this or that kind of behavior. So it reminds me of a statement in Vairagya Shatakam, a great Vedantic scripture. Bhogana bhukta vayameva bhukta. See, in Sanskrit this means we are not enjoying these enjoyments, whatever these enjoyments are, whether it's a nice piece of cake or this watching a movie. The enjoyments are enjoying us. The enjoyments are eating us. They're eating us up, consuming us. We've lost agency. We've surrendered our agency, our freedom to these algorithms and these websites without knowing. We might still think we're free, but they want us to think that. But we've lost a good deal of our freedom and our agency. We've surrendered to these impersonal mechanisms, most of which are fueled by AI. And one result, as I already mentioned, is that we have almost completely lost the ability to concentrate, especially the younger generations who are born into this age of internet and all this. One of my favorite poets, T.S. Eliot, in his poem Four Quartets, has this great line. And he was writing back in the 1930s, 20s and 30s. The line is, he's sketching a scene where people are sitting in a subway together, and they're all reading their newspapers and this and that, or talking to each other. He says, to capture the scene, he says, distracted from distraction by distraction. I really like that. Distracted from distraction by distraction. And this age of instant gratification of the internet has made the situation 100 times worse. And kids are finding it very difficult to just sit still for 2 minutes. They constantly need to occupy their minds with something. That wasn't the case when I was growing up, you know? I would just take a walk in the woods without any kind of device. In fact, there's a book called Dopamine Nation, written by a Stanford psychotherapist called Anna Lemke. And she works with students, and so she was working with one Stanford undergraduate student who was complaining about depression and anxiety. And Anna Lemke makes a very radical suggestion. She says, well, first of all, she finds it. She says, when you walk from your dorm to campus, what do? She says, I've got my earbuds, earbuds. And I'm listening to a podcast, or I'm doing this or that, whatever. She's always up. She said, here's my suggestion. Walk without listening or doing anything. And this girl was terrified. She's going to be boring. I can't do that. It's awful. She couldn't, it was unthinkable to her to take a 10-minute walk from her dormitory to campus without somehow having some noise or something going on. But she did it with great difficulty. It was a great austerity for a few days. And then she reported back about a week or two later, and Anna asked her, so, how are you feeling now? She said, you know what? At first it was awful, but now it's really nice. And I started noticing the trees. So she said, it's a very beautiful way to put it. I started noticing the trees. The small things, the little things in life, the little natural beauty, making personal connections. You know, I was in Japan a few years ago and I was at a restaurant. The next table, there's a mother with two sons. The sons are just on their phones constantly the whole time, playing games or whatever, social media, whatever it is. They didn't exchange one word for the entire dinner, it seemed like. It's tragic. It's very, very sad. So even making time, and even when you sit down with somebody, usually one or both people are on their phones for half the time. There's no sense of etiquette anymore either. You know, someone's talking to me, yeah, oh yeah, right. You talk on the phone of the person sitting with you. So Lemke has a really interesting thesis. So the book is called Dopamine Nation. What's the nation? America. It applies to the whole world, but America's kind of at the vanguard of these things. India's maybe 5 or 10 years behind, but they'll catch up. What she says is, in the past, addicts were substance addicts. They were addicted to some kind of substance, alcohol, some kind of drug. It could be prescription drugs, it could be heroin, cocaine, something. Now she's saying the big problem is, of course, substance addiction remains a huge problem, and opioid addiction, many other things. But there's a new kind of addiction, which this new age of instant gratification has ushered in, namely behavioral addictions. And as a result, between substance addictions and behavioral addictions, some people suffer from both kinds of addiction. We've become an age of addicts. Many, many people are addicts of one form or another, some without knowing it. Why? And she has studied neuroscience, and she's an academic, and so she has done a lot of work on dopamine. She's read a lot of studies on dopamine. She's conducted studies on dopamine. What she finds, so what is dopamine? Dopamine's a neurotransmitter, and it's considered the feel-good chemical. So when you're gratified, when you get this kind of hit of instant gratification, your dopamine levels spike momentarily. So if your favorite drug is heroin, you take an injection of heroin, your dopamine level will spike. But it doesn't have to be a drug. You just tweeted something, and somebody retweets it within 5 seconds. What happens? You notice that retweet, you get a little dopamine buzz. You want a chocolate cake, you get a really delicious chocolate cake, you take a bite of it, dopamine levels spike. It's like that. Or you're driving and your favorite song comes on, dopamine spike. And it's that, what happens though, of course, is that that dopamine high doesn't last. We come down again. The dopamine level comes down. And the more you indulge in that behavior, the greater your tolerance for that behavior becomes, that behavior or substance becomes. And so the lower your baseline dopamine levels become, which means what? You become unhappier as a result. So there's a chemical, neuroscientific reason why repeated indulgence in different forms of instant gratification, especially internet and social media, is making us less and less happy. Because if we weren't to engage in that behavior, our baseline dopamine levels would actually be higher, but they're coming down and down. And so we crave more of that substance or behavior to bring that level up again, and it becomes a vicious cycle, and we get trapped. Anna Lemke says, the pull of dopamine is so strong that studies have shown that tweeting is harder for people to resist than cigarettes and alcohol. Because you get that instant dopamine high that you're looking for. And in fact, she calls the smartphone a modern day hypodermic needle. And it's not an exaggeration, because you can literally get that high whenever you want. Whenever you want. It's constantly on the person. I have it right here with me. And these, I told you, these brilliant masterminds, these programmers, they know notifications are the key to getting people hooked. So you're there, and let's say you just started studying for some big exam. Bing, boom, boom, and you can't resist. How many people can resist checking what that? It's most likely something incredibly stupid, or at least not at all urgent. 98% of the time, it's not urgent. But we can't resist. But we cannot help ourselves but check. It's designed that way. The technology is designed that way. There have been a number of studies done on instant gratification. One is very famous, and I'm not going to mention unless you guys are. How many of you are familiar with the marshmallow test done in the 1970s? Yeah, okay. I'm going to mention some studies that are less well known, but which have similar implications and findings. There's a Swiss scientist named Christian Lucha. He did studies involving mice. He puts a mouse in a cage, and on the other side of the cage, he's designed a mechanism, a lever. Every time the mouse pushes the lever, it gets a dopamine burst, gets a little dopamine high. So the mouse goes over to the lever, hits it once, loves it. The moment it gets that taste of that dopamine, what happens? It'll keep pushing the same lever again and again without stopping. And Professor Lucia, he says, if we didn't take the mouse out of the cage, after 2 hours, it would just starve because it wouldn't eat, it won't sleep, it'll just keep pushing that lever. It's just become an addict. Now, he did an interesting variant on the same experiment. Same mice who already know that the lever gives you dopamine. But between the mouse on one side of the cage and the dopamine lever on the other side of the cage, he places an electrically charged grid, separating the mouse from the lever. So it's very painful for the mouse to step on that grid. Every step it takes, it's in pain. What will the mouse do? And the mouse knows what's in store if it hits the lever. It's going to break, it's going to take the head, and it'll cross that grid. I mean, this is a cruel experiment in a way, and this is, I bet the animal rights people would be furious about this, but even after it reaches that lever on the other side, it's still on the grid. So every time it hits the lever, it's still in pain, and it's still getting electrocuted. And still it won't stop. It won't stop. It reminds me of Sri Ramakrishna's teaching about very worldly people. He likens them to a camel. That camel sees a cactus. There's a tiny bit of juice in that cactus water. But to get to it, you have to go through those needles and bite through those needles. Your gums are bleeding. You're in tremendous pain, and yet the camel won't stop. See, worldly people are like that. But many of us are that camel now. Same thing about these mice. You might be thinking, poor mice. Poor us, we become the mice. Many of us are these mice. We can't help but push that lever again and again. That lever in the form of what? All the various forms of instant gratification put on a platter for us. It's very hard for most of us to resist these temptations. So now, how does Vedanta help us to understand this paradox of instant gratification? How does it help us to lead better, more fulfilling, happier lives? I think what's really helpful is bringing in chapter 18 of the Gita. Bhagavan Krishna defines 3 different kinds of happiness, sukham, in terms of the 3 gunas. What are gunas? First of all, how do we translate guna? Usually it's translated as qualities, but I like the term energies a little better. It's a little bit more accurate and more expressive and more practical for sadhana, for the purposes of spiritual practice. What are the 3 gunas, the 3 energies? Sattva, rajas, and tamas. If we're full of tamas, we tend to be lazy, we tend to procrastinate, we tend to sleep a lot, our minds tend to be on a very low level. And we nurse all sorts of sort of grievances, resentment, we complain a lot, we're very negative, that kind of stuff. If we have a lot of rajas, we tend to be very active, which is a good thing. Sometimes though hyperactive, busybodies, often egoistic, arrogant, boastful, ambitious to a fault sometimes. And if you have a lot of sattva, you'll tend to be more indrawn, naturally kind of compassionate and selfless. It's not that you're a realized soul, but many ethical qualities, being unselfish, giving, less sort of running here and there, just being kind of calm. Having spiritual qualities like devotion and detachment, things like that. So, what is Rajasika happiness? Gita defines it in 18.38 as follows. Vishayendriya sanyogad yat tad agre mritopamam pariname vishamiva tat sukham rajasam shrutam. Any pleasure that involves the contact of a sense organ with a sense object counts as a Rajasika form of Sukham. It gives a Rajasika form of Sukham. What's the structure of all Rajasika happiness? It's like nectar in the beginning. but it becomes like poison in the end. It's like Amrita in the beginning, becomes Visham, poison, Vish in Bangla, in the end. That's the structure of all this. In one verse, the Gita explains the logic of all forms of instant gratification, including social media, and why it's a recipe for unhappiness. We get that little nectar. What is that nectar in the beginning? The dopamine burst. But ultimately, we have to come crashing down. And then it becomes like poison. And we get trapped in this vicious cycle. Why exactly are sense pleasures poison in the end? Think about it intuitively. Look back on your own past. We want something, some sense pleasure, because we think that we're going to get something from it. We're looking for something out of it. If I only get this, then I'll be happy, then I'll be fulfilled, then I'll be complete. And yet, what do we find? We come away from that experience feeling empty usually, unfulfilled. Or with an even greater desire, with an intensified desire for that same gratification or pleasure. So this is what Vedanta has realized. It realized this many thousands of years ago. There's another great Vedanta scripture called Bhagavata Purana, where King Yayati, after many years of intense sense enjoyment, as a king, he could get whatever he wanted. And at the end, he got fed up with all these enjoyments. And he said, Na jatu kamaha kamanam upabhogyena shamyati habisha krishnavatmeva bhuye eva vivadate. Desire is never satisfied through enjoyment, through upabhoga. Desire is never satisfied through enjoyment, gratification. Rather, if your aim is to put out a fire and you throw ghee into the fire, clarified butter, oil, what happens? The opposite results. It gets bigger, the fire gets even bigger, burns even more brightly. That's our mistake. And yet we keep making the same mistake again and again. If only I fulfill desire X, Y, or Z, then I'll be happy. And yet the desire just intensifies instead. This is why all forms of instant gratification, rajasika happiness, are a recipe for unhappiness in the end. They become like poison in the end. Regarding the second value that social media indoctrinates us into, if you've got it, flaunt it. This is especially true for the younger generation, both men and women, girls and boys, but especially for young girls. Female users of social media, they often get in these contests of who can have the prettiest pictures on social media, because that, if you have a really pretty picture, you're going to be praised, you're going to get a lot of likes, you're going to have more friends, you'll be more popular in school. And what about appealing to guys? Well, the less clothes you wear, the better. The more likely it is that you're going to get likes. And this is very, very sad and very, very dangerous. And it's a kind of arms race of how little you can wear on these social media photos. It's terrible. In one study, this is just a quotation, Dr. Hamlet says, many girls are bombarded with their friends posting the most perfect pictures of themselves, or they're following celebrities and influencers, Kim Kardashian and so many others, who do a lot of photoshopping and have makeup and hair teams. If that's their model for what is normal, it can be very hard on their self-confidence. That's what happens. They get sucked into the spiral where they feel less and less good about themselves. And where they become, from a Vedantic standpoint, the root problem, they become more and more body conscious. The root of all suffering is that we mistakenly identify with the body-mind complex. And all of the social media is encouraging us to identify more and more with this body, with this thing which is making us fundamentally unhappy. So you see how Vedanta tends to give deeper answers than even Western neuroscience or positive psychology does. They're moving in the same direction, but Vedanta gives a deeper spiritual answer to, and a kind of metaphysical answer to these questions. So what's the solution? We're going to get to practical tips at the end of the talk, but a better attitude to the body. It's not that you should shun the body, that you should ignore the body. That's not good. That's tamasic. That's not sattvic. Treat your body like an instrument. Devashish and I drove here with the car. Neither of us says, I am the car, the Toyota Corolla. I use the car to get from place A to place B. It's a vehicle. It's literally a vehicle. In the same way the body is a vehicle. In fact, I'm not the first to say this. This is a metaphor used in Kathopanishad. The body is a chariot. The body is a chariot. The soul, the inner soul is a charioteer, guiding the body and using the body to achieve its purposes. You see, it requires a kind of revolution in our identity. That's what's required. That's what Vedanta says we need to do. Instead of identifying with the body, you identify with the deeper soul within. We are all children of the divine, sparks of the divine fire. And we are using the body and using the mind as our instruments in order ultimately to realize God. See how it completely changes our first of all, our attitude toward our own bodies and minds, but it also changes our outlook on the entire world. And we start looking at other people not as bodies, not even as minds, but as souls. If people just interacted with each other as souls rather than bodies, it would revolution. We wouldn't have violence anymore. It would be extraordinary. Of course, it's hard, but we can all work toward it one by one person at a time. The third value that Kelsey talks about, that social media kind of drills into our heads, is success means being a consumer. Thorsten Veblen, who's a great sociologist / economist over 100 years ago, he came up with this idea that it's a term that's used very frequently these days, even now. Conspicuous consumption. You have a lot of money, therefore you need to live in such a way, you have to have such a lifestyle that you flaunt the fact that you have that money. In the West, you find it, at least in general, at least growing up, it was kind of tacky to do that, to show off your wealth. And a billionaire might be driving a Honda Civic or something, you know. But in India, I found it was much more pervasive because maybe they recently came into money, so they have to show off with like super bling bling, you know, like shiny gold chains and necklaces and really fancy cars and this and that. But social media is feeding into this tendency toward conspicuous consumption. If you have a Ferrari, you're going to take a bunch of pictures with your Ferrari and then post them on social media. But what are you looking for? A bunch of likes. And then imagine I only have a plain old, whatever, Mercedes. Even that's a nice car, let's say. I don't have a Mercedes. I'm just kidding. It's not a shabby car. It's a good car. But now I'm seeing somebody posting pictures of his Ferrari, which is 5 times as expensive and nice, and he's getting way more likes than my Mercedes pictures are. So now I want the Ferrari. I'm not satisfied with my Mercedes. You see, that same Vedantic scripture, Vairagya Shatakam, that I talked about earlier, there's a beautiful verse where Bhatrihari, the author, he says, Satu bhavati daridro yasya trishna vishala manasi cha paritushte kotavan ko daridra. This verse gives totally new definitions of wealth and poverty. Satu bhavati daridro yasya trishna vishala. The poor person, the truly poor person, is not one with less money than other people. It's the person whose desires are great. Yasya trishna vishala. Ja trishna vishala. Manasi cha paritushte kotavan ko daridra. And when the mind is content, who is rich and who is poor? It's a beautiful verse, you see. It explains why billionaires, some of the world's richest people, are the least happy. And in this deeper Vedantic sense, the most poor, the most impoverished. The Elon Musks and this, you know, they never seem happy. They always have to be doing new things and this and that. They're doing a lot of good as well. But in their personal lives, you wonder, like, this is not, you don't want to emulate them. They're not role models for most people. And there's a reason why. And there are a bunch of other reasons why social media leads to unhappiness. I'll just mention a few of them. For instance, FOMO. Does anyone know what FOMO means? Fear of missing out is another thing. It really feeds into the whole psychology of unhappiness, really. It's a kind of itch. It's like if you don't check your phone for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, you're like, my friends are doing something fun that I'm not doing. And you just can't resist. You have to look and see that what that so-and-so person is doing. And people project themselves in the best possible light and make it seem as if their life is better than everyone else's, you know? That's why they have these filters on their photos so that they look as beautiful as they can. Their vacation is as glamorous as possible. Everything is not, you don't even know what to believe anymore. Now there's the deep fakes, right? You don't know whether a photo is actually real or photoshopped or, you know, completely doctored, completely invented. And social media thrives on this stuff. People are leading these kind of fake lives to impress others. And it's making other people try to emulate them. And it becomes an arms race of who can lead the happiest fake life. It's all very tragic, actually. Another part of the puzzle involves narcissism. Jean Twenge wrote a book published in 2009 called The Narcissism Epidemic. And this is another symptom of our age. If we didn't call this age the age of, or if I didn't call this the age of instant gratification, I would call it the age of narcissism. Social media, the internet's turning us all into narcissists, most of us. We become very self-centered. In fact, Time comes out with this. It used to be Man of the Year. That's not gender correct. So now it's Person of the Year. 2006 Person of the Year. Can you guess? You. Each of us is the Person of the Year. We are the most important person in the world. It's a kind of a gimmick, but there's a truth to it, actually. Twenge says everybody's opinion is just as valid as everyone else's. Everybody wants to be that blogger who's saying, you know, the most important thing about this current event or that current event. But what's missing is credentials, any kind of expertise in what they're talking about. On top of that, go to any YouTube video. Most of them are full of vitriol in the comment section. Or Facebook, or Twitter. It's like social media has this incredible knack for bringing out the worst in us. Not always, but in many contexts. Why? Part of the reason is because there's very, very little accountability. When you attack somebody on social media, if it's a YouTube comment, first of all, you probably never met that person. They don't know who you are. All they see is your user handle. They can't track you down and fight you or confront you about it. And so that's part of that anonymity, hiding behind anonymity. That's one of the main reasons why people tend to behave so badly on social media. And the more we comment in that way, in these negative ways, what happens? We start identifying more and more with our worst self. You know, you can ask yourself, as a spiritual aspirant, I think it's really helpful to do this. In every walk of life, in every encounter, in every situation, who do I become? What self is brought out under those circumstances? When I'm interacting with my friend, when I'm interacting with if you have a spouse or a partner, when you're raising your kids or interacting with your kids, who do I become? It's a good question to ask. And why? And if you become somebody really bad, you know, that you're not proud of, you can work on trying to change that, you see? And you can kind of do these spot fixes. Maybe you're a wonderful person with your coworkers at work, but you become awful when you talk to your kids. So then you can work on that. Social media brings out the worst in many of us. It brings out the worst in many, partly because you can hide behind this cloak of near anonymity. So YouTube had to get rid of their thumbs down because that was becoming a problem, right? So now it's only thumbs up. And the people posting the video, only them, you can still give a thumbs down, but it's not made public, right? So only the person posting the video can see how many thumbs down you have, which is, it's a little bit more civil, but it's still, we've got a long way to go, let's be honest. So there's a lot more I can say about that, but let me now get to the kind of maybe the most important part of the talk in a way. Practical tips and solutions. So I've been giving a kind of almost doomsday narrative about how terrible social media is. No, what do? I'm not suggesting that you go cold turkey on social media, that you quit everything, renounce. No, that's too radical. It's not necessary for most of us. But number one, so I'll just give a few tips. One, try to be more mindful and honest in your use of social media. Mindful. What does mindful use of social media mean? It means when you're using whatever, Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram or whatever it is, just be a little bit self-aware as you're engaging in that activity. And check how long you're using it Inquire into your motives. Why is it that I spend so much time on? It could be that it's one particular form of social media that's most kind of. It might be Instagram, it might be, and just ask yourself in a very honest way. Why is it that I'm happy scrolling for hours through these photos of my friends, and what am I getting out of that? You see, so that's the first step, is just being honest with yourself and trying to be mindful in your use of social media. And asking yourself, am I getting out of that social media what I was looking for? That's another question. Almost always the answer is, especially if you overuse it, the answer is going to be no. Second, Anna Lemke, she's the author of the book Dopamine Nation. She says it's very useful to use what she calls self-binding strategies. Self-binding, this is actually, the Sanskrit word for this would be tapasya, austerity. But this is not an austerity performed by, sages on a hill or in a cave. This is an austerity that would be helpful for everybody, including even teenage girls and boys. Bind yourself, you restrain yourself in a certain way. How? There are different ways of doing it. Restrict the number of hours or the amount of time you spend on social media every day. That's one way. If you're very young and you're too immature to kind of do that for yourself, maybe your parents are the ones to help you do that self-binding. That's part of good parenting. And parents have to walk a fine line between being too lenient and too strict. So there's a kind of middle ground that I think is a sweet spot for most parents. You have to be very careful. But there are other ways. One simple way to curtail your social media use and make it healthier and more mindful: restrict your social media use only to larger devices. What do I mean? Only tablets or laptops or desktop computers. So what happens? That means I can't use social media on my phone, that 24/7 hypodermic needle. No longer hypodermic needle for me. Or if that's too crazy an idea, that no, I can't think of life without social media on my phone, at least turn your notifications off. At least for certain times when you're trying to concentrate, at the very least. If you're studying for an exam, if you're at work and you're working on something that requires concentration, even if you're just reading, turn off your notifications for that, put your phone on silent, simple things like that. Even that's hard for people, but that's what makes it an austerity. Austerity is not meant to be pleasant. Austerity is a form of sattvika sukham. So Gita, in the previous verse, I mentioned rajasika sukham, rajasika happiness. Sattvika sukham is exactly the opposite. Yattad agre vishameva, pariname vridogumam, tat sukham sattvikam proktam, atma buddhi prasadajam. Sattvika pleasures are like poison in the beginning and like nectar in the end. So exactly the reverse structure of all forms of instant gratification. The opposite of rajasika happiness. And that last phrase is extremely profound from a philosophical and spiritual standpoint. Sattvika pleasures are atma buddhi prasadajam. Sattvika pleasures are born of the satisfaction, the prasada of the atma and buddhi, the soul within and the higher mind, the intellect. So what does that mean? It means that sattvika sukham is qualitatively different from rajasika sukham. Rajasika happiness, all forms of instant gratification, they gratify what? The body and or the mind. That's it. Body-mind complex. Just ask yourself, whatever the form of instant gratification, it gratifies either the body or the mind or both at the same time. Sattvika forms of happiness gratify the deeper soul and the higher mind, the higher intellect within, which makes it qualitatively and not just quantitatively. It's not a difference in degree, it's a difference in kind. Which is why if you can populate your life with more and more sattvika forms of happiness, sattvika forms of joy, automatically you will be happier as a result. That's the Gita's recipe, secret for happiness. That's part of it, at least. And the Gita itself gives an example. It gives many examples of sattvika forms of happiness. One is any form of spiritual practice. Any of the 4 yogas taught in Vedanta. Raja Yoga, which is a yoga of meditation, concentration. Mindfulness meditation falls under that. It's a very popular kind of meditation these days. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, scriptural study, reflection on your true nature as the Atman. Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless action. Through any of these, all of these are sattvika forms of joy. They're qualitatively different from instant gratification because the joy you get from it is the joy of the soul. Because when you engage in these activities, these spiritual practices, you're becoming a better person as a result, you're becoming less selfish, and you are better able to identify with the deeper soul within. But we don't have to think in such a rarefied. Of course, it's very important to do spiritual practice, but what about, here's a common mistake that I find that many spiritual aspirants make. They restrict their spiritual life to the meditation room or their prayer room, their shrine. And they wake up in the morning, they sit for meditation for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, usually distracted or tired, and that's their spiritual practice. Then they come out, then they have to raise their kids, then they have to argue with their spouse, then they have to commute to work, then they have to work with their coworkers. Then life begins. And then what? Maybe at the end of the day when they come back, they enter the meditation room again, and then that's my spiritual practice. So they bifurcate their life into spiritual and secular, or spiritual and the rest of life. One of Nivedita, Sister Nivedita's greatest insights in her introduction to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, she says, one of the most radical things that Swami Vivekananda taught is henceforth no distinction between sacred and secular. No distinction between sacred and secular. Every moment of life needs to be spiritualized. That's what Vedanta teaches. So you have to ask yourself, what do I do outside of the meditation room? You see? So outside the meditation room, when you commute to work, do you listen to music? If so, what kind of music? Is it Rajasika music? Is it Sattvika music? Do you listen to bhajans, stotras, which make you more spiritual? Or is it a Billboard top 10, which is more tends to be more Rajasic? What do I mean by Rajasika music? Rajasika music, I can almost guarantee you, 8 out of the 10, the top 10 in the Billboard is going to be, the lyrics are going to be very worldly. It'll involve, I'm in love with you, why aren't you in love with me? Or I love you, why did you break up with me? Or who needs you, I hate you? Or life goes on even though you left me. 90% of pop. What happens when you listen to it? And they have very catchy beats, they've got strong bass lines. Those bass lines tap into the kind of lower instincts, and you want to dance. That's the idea. So you want to get up and you see. And that, again, it's a kind of indoctrination. Those are the things that matter in life. Whether I'm happy in my love life, or so-and-so broke up with me, or I miss you so much, why don't you miss me, blah, blah, blah. All has to do with the body-mind. How many lyrics in pop songs are spiritual? There are some, but they're rare exceptions, is what I'd say. They're rare exceptions. Movies. If you go to see a movie, what kind of movie are you watching? And so this 3 gunas paradigm is extremely helpful. And I always say my 2 desert island books are Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and the Gita. And you'll find that one of the keynotes of both of these scriptures is the 3 gunas. Sri Ramakrishna is constantly talking about the 3 gunas. Bhagavan Krishna and the Gita is constantly talking about the 3 gunas. And they both classify different activities, different kinds of behavior in terms of the 3 gunas. So that would be a separate talk. I've given the talk in other places. But if you want details, type in Medhanandaji 3 gunas and you'll find it. But you can literally classify everything you do throughout the day based on the 3 gunas. How you interact with your spouse, let's say. What would be a very Rajasic way of interacting with your spouse? High drama. It's both are very emotional. You get angry with each other. You lose your temper quickly. You get irritated. Rajasic. What's a more sattvic kind of? And secondly, the other thing that's very distinctive of a Rajasic kind of relationship with your romantic partner or life partner is unhealthy codependence. You're way too dependent on each other. I've seen cases where when one spouse dies, the other person dies shortly thereafter because they can't live without the other person. That's an unhealthy codependence. But we don't have to be that dramatic. Even assuming that both are still alive, if one person has a business trip and has to leave for 3 days, the other person freaks out. They're constantly texting and emailing and this and that. So a more sattvic kind of relationship is one where you're not as clingy, not as dependent on the other person. You can be best friends. You can love each other. And yet without that kind of extreme dependence and selfish attachment. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called 4 Loves. And he used a beautiful analogy to contrast what he calls erotic love with the love of friendship. He says that erotic love, the love of eroticism, is as if two people are face to face with each other. Because what happens when you're face to face? You forget about the rest of the world. And then the clinging and the unhealthy codependence, all that starts. The love of friendship is like walking side by side with somebody. Each of you has your own path, your own journey. You're side by side and you're supporting each other. Yet you're outward facing, you're facing the world, and you're not as clingy, not as dependent on the other person. But you're helping each other nonetheless, but in a more sattvic way. How are you raising your kids? What's a Rajasic way of parenting? Helicopter parenting. Hovering over them, not giving them the space that they need to grow into their best selves. Being kind of dictatorial as a parent and telling them, if not explicitly, then implicitly, I want you to be X, Y, and Z. I want you to do X, Y, and Z. I want you to major in so and so. I'm speaking from personal experience. My dad forced me to major in computer science when I first enrolled at Berkeley. And I was pretty good at it, but it wasn't my passion. And at the end of the first year, I was hanging out with one of my good friends, and I told him, I was like, I'm fine. Computer science is okay, but it's just not what I love. He goes, what is it that you love? I said, well, I was taking these English and philosophy classes at the same time. I said, I really like those classes. He said, then why don't you change your major? And it hadn't occurred to me myself, honestly, because I have this Bengali mindset, like do whatever your parents tell you. And it took this white American to tell me, to knock some sense into me. Why don't I change it? And it never occurred to me to change my major until he told me. I was like, you know what? Yeah, why don't I change my major? And I changed my major to English and philosophy. And the rest is history. Thank God I changed my major and disobeyed my dad. And he was furious. He was furious. But now, all the work I'm doing, the books I'm writing on Vedanta, I couldn't do that if I was a computer science major. I majored in philosophy, and now I can. It's part of my spiritual practice to think deeply about Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, the teachings of Vedanta. Exploring the philosophical implications of everything. Okay, so sorry, I went on for much too long. I'd love to hear from you now.
Maharaj, Namaskar. Before close, a question actually related to the Sattvic Sukha.
Yeah.
Going back to the example that you mentioned about this, the mouse being zapped, and yet it's going towards the
it can't stop.
Right? Can't stop, right? And then the Thakur's example of the camel actually eating the cactus.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, one would not go through all this painful experience actually, unless they know what the end result is. You want to get a feel for it, then you take the pain to get there.
Correct.
The question I have is spiritual path practice, right? We are, obviously I'm talking about us, about people who are going to the spiritual path. The point is they are going to austerity and a lot of other things actually.
Mm-hmm.
Without really knowing what the end result is. The sukham they're talking about is not defined to them actually.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think that's a very difficult situation actually?
Yeah, that's a nice point. I think that is one of the reasons why sattvika forms of joy are difficult to engage in. Because there's that initial period of poison, and there's that uncertainty. Even if we believe in God and spiritual life and all that, even all the Vedanta scriptures, they say, all your doubts are not removed until you realize the highest truth. There are always going to be some lingering doubts. Or you're a spiritual aspirant, everything's going fine, then suddenly some tragedy strikes. You lose your child or something really terrible. Then what happens? Suddenly your faith gets shaken. And part of the problem is, as you said, there's this kind of difference. There's instant gratification. The nice thing is there's an immediate payoff. You know what you're going to get. You get it. And then there's an instant reward. Spiritual life doesn't seem to be instant rewards. But if you persist in your spiritual practice in these different sattvika forms of joy, what happens? Even prior to reaching the ultimate goal, whatever that might be, there are these moments of upliftment, and not just moments. It's more about just compare your life before you started spiritual practice and your life, after you engage in spiritual practice. And even though most of us haven't realized God yet, you'll find that you're just generally happier, more even keel. You see what I mean? It's harder to kind of put your finger on what exactly has changed. And if you ask, what's the immediate payoff of your mindfulness practice in the morning? Well, you can say certain things, and people have done studies now showing using EEG scanners that your blood pressure is less high, you're less stressed out, you're better able to navigate day-to-day situations, like where in the past you might be losing your temper, now you're calmer. All these things make for a generally happier life, in my opinion. Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful question. Other questions, comments?
Maharaj, I have one question here.
Mhm.
Arpan. Just like to know your opinion about it. Like, when I look at our own way of working today, how it has evolved, especially post-COVID. I don't know if some of you might disagree with it, but typically I'm working for, let's say, 8 hours, 12 hours, the corporate life.
Remotely or at work in your life?
At work or even if at office, what is happening is we are too much consuming into the way we work through laptop or, this kind of devices. And it is clinging us to work like that for long. But if I look at 10 years back, how I was working, it wasn't the same nature. I was going out, I was meeting a lot of people, right? So do you think this is also one of the reasons why people tend to acclimatize more with instant gratification scenarios? Because they are there in that same space.
They're right at your fingertips. So
12
that's a nice
hours,
point. Yeah.
right? And that might be a way the ecosystem is getting developed nowadays, which we think productive, but otherwise counterproductive to the human,
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. Yeah, I mean, just to use a simple example, let's say you're trying to cut out sweets from your diet, and you're doing a great job, and you're not eating sweets. And so this actually happened to me because in India, when my parents came to visit, they brought me my favorite dark chocolate. When I don't have the dark chocolate in my room, no problem. Now the dark chocolate's there. So what do? There's a constant temptation to reach for that chocolate. I tell myself I only have one, I'm gonna have two. So then ultimately what do? I give it, if you can give it away, then it's out of sight, out of mind. So what your point is, it's with that same laptop with which you're doing your work that you can also indulge in any form of instant gratification. And that's very dangerous. Of course, there are these kind of ethical issues, corporate ethical issues of, are you using your office computer? You shouldn't be doing personal things on it. But the lines are pretty blurred. I mean, even though I don't work in an office, I think it's very hard to kind of police that well. And so the lines are blurred to the point where that very laptop is right there. If you just click on the next tab, you'll get that instant gratification. You can be playing poker at the same time that you're working on your big project or whatever it is you're doing. So I think that is a problem. What's the solution? It's tricky, especially with remote work. Because with remote work, you can get away with a lot more than if you're actually in front of other people. If you're sitting in that cubicle, somebody might look over your shoulder. Your boss might be checking in with you. But remotely, and then also interacting with people. Because if you're working remotely, a lot more people are working remotely post-COVID, right? Even the interactions you have with people are virtual. They're not in person. And the study after study has shown that in-person interactions make for greater happiness than interactions that are done virtually or online. And it's intangible, it's hard to explain why, but there's something about the human connection. Something is missing when it's a virtual connection. Yeah, thank you.
Namaste. What I have felt for this beautiful subject, instant gratification, is that it is in today's world, the journey to the gratification has reduced. And that's the reason we say instant.
Well, it's easier to get it, yeah.
Easier to get, right? But let's say if that distance is more for the gratification, I think that journey is very beautiful. And also when you achieve it, you feel really good.
Yeah.
Right? So if I'm talking about the sweets, so in earlier days, if you have to, get some kind of sweets,
right,
we have to wait, right? And if it is some kind of fermentation or whatever it is, it will take, I cannot cannot get the sweet today,
Instantly,
right
yeah.
now,
Mhm.
instantly, because otherwise I can go to the sweet shop and get it.
Right.
But in those days, no. So that journey was so beautiful because now I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and now when I got it, oh, I feel so good. I
Right.
feel really
The
good.
anticipation is part of the pleasure in a way. Yeah.
And the second thing is also that after you do get that gratification, there is a diminishing,
Returns.
Oh, I want a Mercedes.
Mhm.
Now I got the Mercedes,
Mhm.
but then second day, third day, fourth day,
Yeah.
it's,
You get used to it. It's
yeah.
what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, which is that you think that the more money you get or the more possessions you have or the better the possessions you have, the happier you'll be. But in fact, you're moving nowhere fast because you quickly adapt to your whatever that new pleasure is, and that becomes the norm for you. Yeah.
I and my wife always discuss that no matter how much bigger house we get,
Yeah.
I still have to sleep in a 6 foot or 8 foot bed.
Yeah.
And after that, I have to get some sleep too. So.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. There's somebody with the hand up, a gentleman here. Yeah, in the front.
Do you have the microphone?
Yeah.
Yes.
And my wife told me that not to open my mouth. I'm violating it.
Oh.
Not because of that, for a simple reason. My guru and his guru used to crack a joke.
Swahanandaji.
This is that one boss is sitting in his office, and another subordinate came and complained about another subordinate, and this guy half asleep said, yes, you are right. You're right. Let me see what I can do. And he went away. Came the complaining other subordinate. He came and said, this guy is doing this guy is doing this is not logical. They should do this one. He said, you are right. Third one came and the boss also said, he's right. Then his wife came and told him, what kind of a man are you? You're saying everything to right, everything. And he said, you are right. The point here that got ignored is that everyone is a expression of the divinity. So why he was joking, but he is actually seeing that individual persons, each of us have a different world.
Mhm.
And we live in that world, we created that world. And how do we know? This is a question I dealt with other Swamis. We started from one cell that became heart, lung, kidney, and each of them looks different, performs different. But if you take a cell from each of them, you can clone the whole body. In essence, we are the cells in the universe, in the God's body, maybe you can say. What we have to know is that whether we are a kidney cell or a heart cell or a brain cell, and do that work with your dearest, how hard you can do, you will be happy.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Question is that is what sadharma.
Mm.
When Maharaj changed from computer to this one, he changes his sadharma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh, thank you for mentioning that. Thank you. I actually wanted to mention it, but my talk is getting too long. So the Gita, one of the main concepts is swadharma. Exactly. And there's a profound linkage between the Gita's teaching on this issue with positive psychology. Martin Seligman, in his book Authentic Happiness, he says that the way to achieve genuine fulfillment and happiness in life is to take these two steps. Number one, identify your signature strengths. And number two, find a calling, a line of work, a vocation that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths on a daily basis, on a regular basis. And the Gita's concept of swadharma is that number one, that first step, your signature strengths. Bhagavan Krishna defines swadharma in terms of guna and karma. Guna are your innate qualities. Karma, your behavior. Another interesting thing is, the Gita talks about caste, varna, the chaturvanya, the fourfold caste system, Brahmins, Kshatriyas. But it doesn't define caste in terms of heredity. You're not born as a Brahmin, born into a Kshatriya family or whatever. What qualities do you exhibit? What's your guna and your karma? Chaturvanya maya srishtam guna karma vibhagasha, says Krishna. I created the caste system based on guna and karma, says Krishna. You see, that was the original caste system, says Swami Vivekananda. He distinguishes the current pernicious caste system, which is based on heredity, with the original one, which actually is based on a very profound psychological insight and social insight, which is that you should be able to do the work that is best suited to you. If you do that, you will make the most rapid spiritual progress and you will maximally benefit society. A well-functioning society is one that allows each person to follow his or her own swadharma naturally. And if I'm meant to be if I am drawn to being a lawyer, if I'm called to being a lawyer, and society is such that I can only be a doctor or a janitor, I'm not going to be a very good janitor or doctor. Society is going to suffer in the end. So there's both a social benefit and an individual spiritual and ethical benefit to this following your swadharma. But what I would add is, see, this is where I think Vedanta goes it goes deeper than even modern Western neuroscience, positive psychology. Martin Seligman says, follow these 2 steps. Number 1, identify your signature strengths. Number 2, find a calling that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths. He doesn't ask the motives behind the action. What Vedanta adds, what the Gita adds, is step 3. Whatever your calling is, do that work as karma yoga. Convert karma into karma yoga. What do I mean by karma yoga? Don't be attached to the work itself and try not to be attached to the fruits of the work. And instead, do the work as an offering to the divine and as a worship of the divine. That's how the Gita defines karma yoga. That's, as far as I can tell, completely missing from positive psychology. But there's a world of difference. Even if you follow steps 1 and 2, there's a world of difference between the person who does that work, the work they love, the work they're very good at, the work they love, egoistically and selfishly, craving the fruits of their actions, looking for name and fame and this and that, and the person who does that exact same work with the same competence, with that same passion, except as karma yoga, as an offering to the divine, as a worship of the divine. There's a world of difference. And the latter, doing the work as karma yoga, that step 3 is necessary for genuine happiness. So thank you for reminding me of that point. Anyone else? Very good questions. No more questions?
Closing thoughts.
Well, no closing thoughts, but closing mantra. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Food prasad downstairs. Please.
I have a small announcement before you go. Maharaj, thank you for coming over here and for the discourse and the Q&As. And really, it was a great morning. That is, and in your very busy schedule in your office. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming over this morning. And we will be having lunch between 12:30 to 2 p.m. Possibly we need to wait for about 5-10 minutes downstairs, but I think we can get started. And at about 2:15, 2:30 p.m. we will adjourn. About the forthcoming sessions, I just want to remind. On Saturday, May 11th, we have a 12 hours vigil non-stop, starting from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And several of you have registered. We have already, all the slots have been registered now. It doesn't mean that if somebody else is interested, they can't do, they can come and join at any slot at any time. So it can go in parallel. We have at 5:30 p.m. Aarti that will happen in parallel. On May 19th in the afternoon, we have a Carnatic musical performance by a famous Kerala Trivandrum-based artist by name Medhanandaji, accompanied by 3 musical instruments artists from Tamil Nadu. So the flyer is available in the front desk. The communications has gone out, and she's a great singer, and she's been offering her divine singing here in our shrine. Please do go, if you can make it, register as soon as possible. And also we are looking for some volunteers who can sponsor for this event, with minimum $200 or more to make the cost of the event to be met. Please do register and come and participate if you can. It's going to be that is a good evening in a divine atmosphere. And on Saturday, June 15th, we have Nectar on Supreme Knowledge, the session 3 by Swami Sarvapriyananda. And on Saturday, June 22nd, Swami Kripamayananda will be visiting us, and we will be having a full day event. And also looking at a long horizon, we will be celebrating our 3rd annual day celebrations on September 14th and the 15th, Saturday and Sunday. Please mark your calendar very well in advance so that that is we don't miss all these events. And thank you for coming. And now let us adjourn for lunch. Thank you.
Will you be back here?
No. After lunch we can leave. Yeah.
Evening Aarti at 5:30.
Yeah, as usual, we have the evening Aarti at 5:30 p.m. that will start. Yeah, but 2:30 we will adjourn. People who is coming for Aarti, they will come back in the evening at 5:30.